So you want to get beyond just happy and sad when you're speaking English. Like
Yeah.
you're ready to really express how you feel.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today.
Gotcha.
We checked out this popular podcast. It's called Speak Up, and it's all about mastering English.
Okay, cool.
And it turns out that expressing your emotions in another language, it's like a whole art to it.
It really is.
And it goes way beyond just knowing the basic vocabulary words.
Absolutely. And what I find so fascinating is how much our culture, shapes how we express those feelings.
You know, that's so true.
So we'll be looking not just at the vocabulary, but those subtle nuances that can really make your English sound more authentic.
I love that. Okay, so let's unpack this.
Yeah.
The podcast started with happiness.
Okay.
And they had all these really interesting phrases like over the moon or even on cloud nine. I mean, honestly, do people really talk like that?
They absolutely do.
Yeah.
Those are what we call idiomatic expressions.
Oh, okay.
And you can think of them as adding color and personality to your language.
So it's like spices in a recipe or something.
Exactly. And it's not just about knowing the words you know, it's about choosing the right intensity for the situation.
Okay, I see what you mean.
Like you could just say happy,
Right.
but maybe you feel more like thrilled or even ecstatic.
Oh, that makes sense.
Those words kind of take it up a notch.
Yeah, like choosing the right shade of paint to capture the feeling.
Precisely. And don't forget about those nonverbal cues too.
What do you mean?
Like a huge grin when you say, I'm so happy, can really make a difference.
Oh, that's true.
Imagine you're at a meeting at work
Okay.
and you're genuinely enthusiastic about an idea,
Mm-hmm.
that energy can be contagious.
It really can.
Yeah.
That's such a good point. Okay, so the podcast also talked about disappointment,
Yeah.
which feels a little bit trickier to navigate, I think.
Yeah, it can be.
They suggested phrases like a bit let down or kind of bummed.
Right.
Why soften it so much?
Well, it's really a politeness thing,
Okay.
English-speaking cultures, especially in the U.S. and U.K.,
Yeah.
they put a lot of emphasis on not rocking the boat,
Mm-hmm.
especially with sensitive topics.
Well, that's interesting.
It's about managing expectations and keeping things harmonious.
So finding that sweet spot between being honest but also considering the other person's feelings.
Exactly. And they actually gave a really good example.
What was it?
It was about someone hoping for a promotion at work,
Okay. Yeah.
but they didn't get it.
Right.
Now, saying something like, I'm devastated, is probably a little too dramatic for that situation.
Yeah, that's a bit much.
A better response would be, I'm a bit disappointed, but I understand.
That's a good point.
It's more diplomatic.
It acknowledges your feelings without causing a scene.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And here's a little tip for you.
Okay, what's that?
Practice saying these phrases out loud.
Out loud.
Yeah, it might feel a little silly at first,
I can see that.
but it'll make you so much more comfortable with the tone.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That way, when you need to use it in real life, it just comes out naturally.
That's great advice. Speaking of feeling flustered, though, the podcast then dove into surprise and shock.
Oh,
And one of the hosts had this hilarious story about walking into his own surprise party.
oh yes. He was
Yeah.
completely floored, which is such a vivid way to describe that feeling of utter astonishment.
I know, I love that phrase.
Me too.
It's so visual. Have you ever been that surprised?
Actually, I have. Years ago, I was convinced I was just going on a simple business trip,
Okay.
but it turned out my family had secretly flown in to meet me at the airport.
Oh, wow.
Talk about being speechless.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
But sometimes even a simple wow is enough, right?
Absolutely. It's all in the delivery.
Oh, okay.
Big wide eyes, jaw dropped, maybe even a gasp.
It's about conveying the feeling authentically, even if you don't use a lot of words.
Exactly.
It's like those old silent film actors who could say so much with just a look.
Right. Sometimes less is more.
Okay, the podcast then got into anger and frustration.
Ooh, that's a tough one.
I know it feels like a minefield because you want to be clear about how you're feeling, but you don't want to come across as too aggressive either.
You've got to strike that balance.
Exactly. So the hosts emphasized using words like upset or frustrated
Yeah.
instead of just jumping straight to angry.
Right.
So is it just about being polite, or is there more to it than that?
Well, politeness definitely plays a part,
Okay.
but it's also about emotional intelligence.
Interesting.
It's about choosing words that de-escalate a situation rather than turning it into a shouting match.
Oh, I see what you mean.
For example, this is frustrating.
Yeah,
Sends a very different message than, you made me angry.
that's a really good point. It's about owning your feelings without putting the blame on the other person.
Exactly. And the podcast hosts actually mentioned a phrase,
What was that?
driving me nuts,
Oh, yeah.
which is a more informal way to express frustration.
When would it be okay to use something like that?
Well, it's best saved for friends and family.
Okay.
You probably wouldn't use it in a professional setting.
Unless you're really close with your colleagues.
Right. It's all about reading the room and understanding the context.
So context is key. It's just like with everything else.
Exactly.
Now, this one I think we can all relate to.
What's that?
Nervousness and fear,
Oh, yeah.
especially when you're trying to use a new language.
Absolutely. We've all been there.
And the podcast had some good phrases for this, too.
They did. The classic butterflies in my stomach is such a poetic way to describe that fluttery feeling of anxiety, isn't it?
It is. It's funny how we use physical sensations to describe emotions,
I know.
even if they're not literally happening in our bodies.
It's a great example of how language goes beyond just the dictionary definitions. It's about metaphors, imagery, evoking a feeling in the listener.
That's so true. They also mention phrases like, I'm a bit on edge, or I'm feeling anxious.
Right. And one of the hosts made a really great point
What was that?
about how important it is to actually acknowledge these feelings.
Interesting.
Like trying to push them down or ignore them often just makes it worse.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But when you name them, it can actually be really empowering.
Like you're taking charge of the situation instead of letting it control you.
Precisely. It's like saying, yes, I'm nervous, but that's okay. It's normal, and I can still do this.
It builds confidence and resilience.
Exactly.
I love that perspective.
Okay, last but not least, let's tackle love and affection.
All right.
I think this one feels tricky to express in any language.
It can be.
But the podcast had some good examples. What stood out to you?
The phrases that conveyed real depth, like, you mean a lot to me, or I care about you deeply.
Those are beautiful.
They go beyond just the surface level,
Absolutely. And of course, they talked about head over heels for that more romantic situation.
Right. But even simpler phrases like, I appreciate you, or you're the best, can mean so much in everyday relationships.
Yeah.
It's really about making the effort to express gratitude and affection to those around you. It's the little things that often mean the most, right? So we've covered a lot of ground here, from happy to sad, frustrated, scared, and even loving.
We have.
It's amazing how much nuance there is to expressing these feelings, even in a language you're still learning.
It is. It's like peeling back the layers of an onion. There's always more to discover.
That's such a good analogy.
But that's what makes language learning so fascinating and rewarding.
Totally.
It's about connecting with others on a deeper level.
Absolutely.
And what's really interesting?
What's that?
Expressing emotions in another language.
Yeah.
It can actually help you understand your own feelings better.
How so?
It's like you're looking at them through a fresh lens. Yeah.
Oh, I can see that. Like you suddenly have this new vocabulary to describe experiences that maybe you didn't have the right words for before.
Exactly. The podcast host made this great point.
What was it?
About how it's important to not just learn the words,
Right.
but to actually practice using them.
Okay.
They said it's like learning a musical instrument.
Oh, interesting.
You can study all the theory you want,
Mm-hmm.
but until you actually pick it up and play,
Yeah.
you'll never really get it.
That's such a perfect analogy. So it's all about getting out of your comfort zone and experimenting with different ways of expressing yourself.
Precisely. And don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Oh, absolutely.
Everyone stumbles when they're learning a new language.
Yeah.
It's part of the process.
It's about embracing those awkward moments and using them as opportunities to learn.
You got it. And here's a tip for you.
Okay, I'm listening.
Find a language partner or a group to practice with,
Mm-hmm.
like in a safe environment where you can make mistakes. And it's okay.
Right.
Because bouncing ideas off of someone and getting feedback
Yeah,
can be so valuable.
that's a great idea. And there's so many resources available now, too.
Oh, yeah.
Like language exchange apps, online communities, even virtual reality platforms.
It's true.
Where you can practice with people from all over the world.
It's an incredibly exciting time to be learning a language.
It really is. The possibilities are endless.
They are. And, it's not just about the practical benefits of communication either.
What else is there?
It's about expanding your horizons,
Oh, yeah.
broadening your perspective, and connecting with different cultures in a much deeper way.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's about enriching your life in so many ways.
It really is.
Now, thinking back to the podcast, Marco and Erica mentioned how a single word can sometimes be just as powerful as a whole phrase.
Mm-hmm.
And they used wow to express surprise as like a prime example.
Yes. And they emphasize how important it is to be mindful of those nonverbal cues, too.
What do you mean?
Like, Your facial expressions, your tone of voice, your body language,
Right.
they all play a role in conveying your message.
So it's about being present and fully engaged in the conversation.
Absolutely. And also being sensitive to cultural context.
Oh, that's a good point.
Because what might be considered polite in one culture
Yeah,
could be seen as rude in another.
that's so true. It's about being respectful of other cultures and being mindful of those differences.
Exactly. And the podcast hosts, they had some really insightful advice on navigating those cultural differences,
Like what?
observing, listening, asking questions.
So being a curious and open-minded learner is essential.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And having the humility to admit when you don't know something.
I love that. It's about embracing the whole journey, and enjoying the process of learning and growing as you go.
And remember, language learning is a lifelong pursuit.
That's a good way to put it.
It's not about reaching some final destination.
Right.
It's about continually exploring, discovering, and broadening your understanding.
Beautifully put. Okay, so let's talk about a topic that can be a bit more challenging.
What's that?
Expressing anger and frustration.
Ah, yes.
We touched upon it a little bit earlier,
Yeah,
but I think it's worth exploring a little deeper.
I agree. It's a topic that requires a delicate balance.
Yeah.
You want to express yourself clearly and assert your feelings.
Right.
But you also want to avoid being aggressive or confrontational.
Exactly. The podcast emphasized using I statements.
Yes. Focusing on your own feelings and experiences
Right.
rather than blaming or accusing the other person.
So it's about taking responsibility for your emotions and expressing them in a way that's respectful and constructive.
Precisely. So instead of saying, "You made me angry,"
Okay.
you might say, "I feel frustrated when this happens."
I see. It shifts the focus from blame to understanding.
Exactly. And be specific about what's bothering you
Okay.
instead of making these vague generalizations.
So being articulate and providing concrete examples can really make a big difference.
It really does.
Yeah.
And be mindful of your tone of voice and body language too.
Oh, right.
Project confidence and assertiveness.
Okay.
But avoid being aggressive or threatening.
It's like walking a tightrope.
It is.
Expressing yourself honestly while also maintaining a respectful and productive dialogue.
It definitely takes practice,
Yeah,
but mastering it is crucial for healthy relationships,
for sure.
both personal and professional.
Absolutely. Well said. The podcast hosts also talked about the importance of active listening, really paying attention to what the other person is saying, both verbally and non-verbally.
It's about showing that you're present, that
Okay.
you're engaged in the conversation and that you value the other person's perspective.
And trying to understand their point of view, even if you don't necessarily agree with it.
Precisely. Empathy and compassion are so crucial in any conversation.
Absolutely. It creates that safe space where everyone feels heard and respected.
Yes. It's about building bridges instead of walls.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's shift gears to a lighter topic.
Okay, what's that?
Expressing love and affection.
Ah.
The podcast had some really heartwarming examples of how to do this in English.
They did. And they really stressed the importance of genuineness and authenticity. Don't just say what you think the other person wants to hear.
Right.
Speak from your heart.
That's such a great piece of advice.
Yeah.
Allow yourself to be vulnerable and let your true feelings shine through.
Exactly. And be specific.
Okay.
Instead of just saying, "I love you," tell them what you love about them.
Find the words that truly capture what makes them special to you.
Precisely. And remember, actions often speak louder than words.
That's true.
Small acts of kindness, thoughtful gifts, spending quality time together.
Right.
These are all expressions of love and appreciation.
That's a beautiful reminder.
Yeah.
It's about making that conscious effort to make the other person feel loved and valued.
Absolutely. It's
Like-
about celebrating that joy and happiness that love brings into our lives.
This deep dive has been incredibly insightful.
It has.
We've covered a lot,
We have.
from the nuances of idiomatic expressions to the importance of cultural sensitivity and the power of active listening.
It's all connected, isn't it?
It really is.
Language is more than just words.
Right.
It's a reflection of our thoughts, feelings, and experiences.
Absolutely. It's a tool for connection, for building relationships, for creating shared meaning.
As our listener continues their English language journey,
Yeah.
I encourage them to keep exploring, experimenting, and expressing themselves authentically.
Great advice. Don't be afraid to step outside your comfort zone. Try new things and embrace the beauty of human connection.
And remember that tip from Marco and Erica?
What was that?
Practice those phrases out loud.
Oh, yeah.
It might feel silly at first,
Yeah.
but it really helps to internalize them and make them feel more natural.
It's like anything else, practice makes perfect.
And as you become more comfortable expressing yourself in English,
Mm.
you'll find that it opens up a whole new world of possibilities.
You'll be able to connect with people on a deeper level, share your thoughts and feelings more effectively, and navigate the complexities of human interaction with greater confidence.
Being able to communicate in another language is truly a gift.
It is.
It enriches your life in countless ways.
So to our listener out there, keep learning, keep growing, and keep expressing yourself. Your voice matters, and the world is waiting to hear it.
Beautifully said. And on that note, I think we've come to the end of our deep dive.
It really has been a fascinating journey, exploring all these different ways we can express ourselves in English.
It has. And I think we've given our listeners a lot to consider, you know.
I agree. We went from those simple, single words to really understanding how they're used in different situations.
Right. Like what they imply.
Exactly. And even how our body language adds a whole other layer to what we're trying to say.
That's true.
And we can't forget about those cultural differences.
Oh, definitely.
What might be totally fine in one culture could be completely different somewhere else.
Yeah, it's a great reminder that learning a language, it's not just about the words themselves.
Right. It's about understanding the culture behind those words.
Exactly.
So as you continue your English language journey, what's one piece of advice you'd give to our listeners?
I'd say don't be afraid to experiment.
I like that.
Try out new phrases, even if it feels a little awkward at first, you know?
Yeah, you don't have to be perfect.
Exactly. The more you practice, the more natural it'll become.
It's like anything else, the more you do it, the easier it gets.
And remember, the goal is to communicate, to connect with others, to express yourself authentically.
That's what it's all about.
So don't let that fear of making a mistake hold you back.
Well said. It's been such a pleasure diving into this topic with you.
The pleasure was all mine. It's
Yeah.
always so interesting to explore all these nuances of language and how we communicate.
Absolutely. To our listener out there, we hope this deep dive has given you some valuable insights and practical tips
Yes.
to really help you enhance your English fluency.
Remember, language learning is a journey,
It is.
not a destination.
So true.
Embrace the process, enjoy the ride, and never stop exploring.
Beautifully put. And who knows, maybe you'll inspire someone else to start their own language learning adventure.
I hope so.
Until next time, happy learning, everyone.